They laughed when broke cowboy Eli Barnes spent his last coins on a giant horse that had killed 3 men. To them, he was a fool begging to die
40,
poor.
do I hear 50?
But when Titan's dark
Going
eyes
once,
met his,
going twice.
the wind in the valley seemed to
Sold.
stop.
Well,
No one knew it then, but that moment
horse is
sparked a
putting up
story
a
Dust
fight.
Creek would remember
He's
forever.
earned his keep today,
Of a
just
man,
trying to get
a
through
horse,
town.
and the bond that outlived fear itself. The sun hung low over Dust Creek, Texas, a hot brass coin melting into the horizon. Dust rose in sheets off the stockyard as the crowd gathered for the monthly auction, boots grinding the earth, voices roughened by heat and gossip. Among them stood Eli Barnes, hat pulled low, coat too thin for a man who'd seen better years. His hands, calloused from a life of rope and saddle, clutched a small pouch that jingled with the sad sound of barely a dozen coins. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip. Next up, Titan, 18 hands high, near a ton of muscle, mean as a thunderstorm. The handlers led out the horse, a massive gray draft beast with scars carved deep across his flanks. The crowd stirred, half awe, half fear. Titan threw his head, snorting clouds of steam in the dry air, the chains on his halter rattling like warning bells. Someone laughed. "Ain't nobody fool enough to bid on that monster?" Another shouted. Even the auctioneer grinned nervously, glancing at the animal as if waiting for it to explode. Eli's heart thudded once hard. He didn't know what drew him. Maybe it was the eyes. They weren't wild, not really. There was something behind them, something heavy and human, like the look of a man who'd been broken more than once and learned to stand quiet through the pain. "Starting bid, $50, the auctioneer barked. Silence. Boots shuffled. A tumbleweed rolled across the fence line, as if even nature refused to take part. 30? 20? Still no answer. The crowd's laughter came easy then, cruel and knowing. From the back, Eli's voice cut through it. 10. Heads turned. The laughter roared back twice as loud. $10? For a killer? Make it 15, Eli said, his voice steady though his throat was dry. The auctioneer hesitated, glanced around. Do I hear 20? Only chuckles replied. Sold. $15 to Mr. What's your name, son? Barnes. Eli Barnes. The gavel came down like a shot. Titan jerked at the sound, metal clanging. The handlers jumped back. The crowd erupted again, shouting over one another. Bets on how many days Eli would last, how soon the horse would crush him. Eli ignored them all. He walked toward the corral, boots sinking into the dust. Titan towered over the fence, breath fogging the dry air. The man stopped just outside the gate and took off his hat, not as a show of courage, but of respect. Easy, he murmured. Ain't no one gonna hurt you today. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Titan's ears flicked forward. The giant horse lowered his head, nostrils flaring near Eli's outstretched palm. The crowd fell quiet, watching. Eli held his breath. Dust swirled between them, the world narrowing to that single moment. The horse's eyes, dark, deep, and tired, met his, and something passed between them, wordless but binding. Then Titan bowed his head, just slightly, like a soldier greeting his commander after a long war. A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Did you see that? Someone whispered. He bowed? Eli fastened the rope halter, his movements slow, deliberate. Guess we understand each other, he said softly, leading the horse away while the laughter turned uncertain behind him. Out on the street, the evening wind carried grit and the faint chime of the saloon's piano. Eli walked beside the towering horse, the two shadows stretching long across the ground. A boy ran past, pointing. That's the crazy cowboy, the one bought the killer horse. Eli smiled faintly beneath the brim of his hat. Maybe, he murmured. Or maybe he just bought himself a second chance. As the sun sank, Titan stopped, looking back toward the auction yard. His ears twitched. For a fleeting second, Eli thought he saw recognition in the horse's eyes. A memory maybe of another master, another life. Then the giant beast exhaled, a sound that shivered through the fading light like an old man's sigh. Eli touched his shoulder gently. "You and me, big fella," he said. "We'll show." Somewhere behind them, the crowd's laughter echoed one last time, brittle against the wind. But in that moment, Eli Barnes didn't hear it. All he could feel was the warm breath of the horse beside him, and the strange certainty that, for reasons neither man nor beast yet understood, their stories had just become one. They took the back way to the edge of Dust Creek, where cottonwoods leaned over a dry wash, and the ground turned to powder at each step. Houses thinned to shacks, then to one more tired than the rest, a gray lean-to with a tin roof that clicked as the heat fell off the day. Eli's place. A rope for a gate, a lantern by the door, its glass smoked from cheap kerosene. He tied Titan to a fence post and stood a moment with his hand on the horse's shoulder, feeling the heat, the slow thunder of a heart that didn't know him yet. "You'll have water, best I can spare," he said. "Hay ain't much, but it'll keep the gnaw off you." Titan blew a breath that rattled Eli's sleeve. His ears hung half-mast, not fearful, not angry, listening. Inside, the one-room shack held the story of a life in pieces, a bedroll, a blackened coffee pot, 3 plates that didn't match. On a shelf, a photograph in a cracked frame, Eli in a clean shirt, a woman with laughing eyes tucked under his arm, a little girl holding a clutch of wild sunflowers. Smoke had yellowed the edges, as if memory had been singed and left to cool. He set the lantern on the table and worked the pump at the wash until it coughed up a ribbon of silted water. When he came back, Titan had twisted the rope and was watching through the doorway, giant head shadowing the threshold like a storm cloud. "Curious, are you?" Eli said. "Reckon I am too." He held the bucket steady while Titan drank. Up close, he could see the map of scars, old burns like lightning down the shoulder, a bald patch where a harness had rubbed raw, a rawer line across the chest. Eli had seen horses broken by hard hands, but this was a ledger of punishments. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Titan lifted his head and looked at him, as if the question had weight. Night gathered quietly. Coyotes tuned up beyond the flats, a thin, lonesome chorus. Eli spread a blanket in the yard and sat by the fence, humming a tune with no words. It had ridden with him through bad weather and long miles. Through the day, a wind slammed fire across his ranch, and the sky turned the color of ashes. He hadn't gone back. He'd buried what he could and come to Dust Creek with calloused hands and silence. "Her name was May," he said, not sure why he said it out loud. "Our girl was Ruthie. She liked daisies better than dolls. Used to stuff 'em in a gelding's forelock. Said it made him look like Sunday." The words scraped on the way out, like clearing a flue that hadn't seen fire in too long. Titan lowered his head until his muzzle hovered even with Eli's shoulder. The warm scent of horse, sweet hay and leather and dust, washed over him, and his throat eased. Eli went inside and took down an old halter he'd been mending with a patch of soft leather. He ran his thumb along the stitching, then set it aside and lifted the photograph from the shelf. "I don't keep much," he told the room, "but I keep this." Back at the gate, Titan had his ears pricked and his eyes on Eli's hands. "You want to meet him?" Eli asked, feeling foolish. He held the picture where the horse could see. Titan flared his nostrils, fogged the glass, then, very gently, touched it once. When the breath cleared, a damp ring circled Ruthie's smile. Eli stared at it and felt something shift in him, quiet as a door opening. "All right," he whispered. All right. He worked by lantern light, building a small pen off the fence with spare rails and an iron tie ring knocked from an old hinge. Titan watched each motion like a student at the elbow of a quiet teacher. Eli talked the whole time, about ropes and saddles, about how some men made a horse choose between fear and pain, and how that wasn't the only way. He explained the halter as if to a child, how pressure could be a question and release could be an answer. The big gray didn't move as Eli settled the leather behind his ears and let it sit, easy as a handshake. Good, Eli said. Good boy. The words felt strange after so much silence, but they fit. Titan shifted closer, shoulder brushing the boards, as if the sound alone had weight enough to lean on. Wind came up late, sliding under the tin and tapping it with stray seed. Down in town, a piano tried to find a tune. Eli checked the tie, then unhooked it and stepped back. Your choice, he murmured. Titan lifted his head but didn't leave, as if the space inside the new pen was wider than the open flats had ever been. He slept by the fence, stars thrown thick overhead, the lantern a low coin in the window. He dreamed in scraps, Ruthie's sunflowers, May laughing as a colt nuzzled her apron, smoke rolling like tide over a white rail. He woke before dawn with his heart running, and the old ache sitting in the room like a shadow that came and went with him. Titan was waiting. Eli worked the pump, water coughing into the bucket. Daylight, he told the horse, comes whether you earn it or not. He set hay in a rough manger he'd hammered together from crate slats and a broken chair. Titan mouthed at it with care, lips working delicate around splinters, as if he understood it had cost something to make. When the horizon pinked, Eli slipped the halter on again, slower than slow. He laid his palm on Titan's neck and felt the skin roll slightly under the hair, muscle hard as seasoned oak. I won't hurt you, he said. Not now, not ever. We'll do this the decent way. A meadowlark called. The day began to smell like warm wood. Eli set his hip to the horse's shoulder so Titan could feel his weight without surprise and rubbed circles into the scar tissue until heat soaked the skin. The big gray sighed, a low sound that seemed to come up from the ground through his bones. He didn't push for more. No saddle, no rope tricks. He walked a step and waited, then another, and every time the lead fell slack, he let his own breath go easy, a tiny release the horse could feel. They made one slow, clumsy circle. It wasn't much. It was everything. By mid-morning, Dust Creek had its gossip arranged. Wagons rattled, the bell at the mercantile clanged. Two boys drifted to the wash to stare. One tossed a clod that fell short. Go on, Eli said without looking. Their laughter skittered away. He set the halter aside. That's enough, he told Titan. A man shouldn't ask more than a friend is ready to give. He didn't notice when he said the word friend. If he had, he might have been ashamed of it. But the truth of it settled easy and stayed. He took the photograph from the shelf and brought it out again, not sure why. Titan reached for it, just as gentle as before, and this time held his breath over it, a warm hush that fogged the glass in a soft circle. Eli swallowed. May, he said, voice rough, you'd have laughed to see me now. Hoofbeats sounded on the hardpan road. The cadence was official, measured, unhurried, the way a man rides when the badge on his vest does half his talking. A second set followed, lighter but quick. Eli slid the picture into his pocket and turned. Two riders drew up at the rope gate, dust halos settling around their horses' legs. Sheriff Reeves spat into the dirt, eyes gone narrow at the sight of Titan filling half the yard. Beside him, a man in a town coat with a neat beard, Galloway's bookkeeper, if Eli remembered right, lifted his chin as if the whole place offended him. Morning, Barnes, the sheriff said. "We've had ourselves a flood of concerns about that big beast you fetched home." Eli felt Titan's breath on the back of his neck, steady as a bellows. He didn't step away. "He's on my land. He's tied. He's fed." "Maybe so," Reeves said, glancing at the bookkeeper. "But he's got a history. Folks want him kept out past the flats. Safer for everyone." Eli looked from the sheriff to the horse and back again. The wind lifted and dropped the tin in a soft rattle. Somewhere down in town, a piano tried to find a tune. He put his hand on Titan's withers and felt the big muscle quiver, not in fear, in attention. "Safer," Eli repeated. "For who?" The bookkeeper's mouth pinched. "For the people who have to live with your choices, Mr. Barnes, and for certain investments." Eli held Reeves's gaze. Behind him, Titan's ears tipped forward, fixed on the strangers at the gate, as if he recognized trouble the way cattle smell rain. The sheriff shifted in the saddle. "You coming quiet on this? Or are we going to have a morning's trouble?" he asked. Eli's answer gathered itself in his chest, all flint and prayer. Before he could speak, Titan took one slow step and lowered his massive head toward the rope gate, eyes never leaving the men beyond it, as if he'd made up his mind too. And for the first time since the flames took his old life, Eli wondered if this new one was already catching fire. Sheriff Reeves waited, reins loose, eyes half hidden under the brim of his hat. Dust drifted through the early light, curling between the men like smoke. The bookkeeper, thin, sharp, smelling of starch, shifted impatiently in his saddle. Titan stood perfectly still behind Eli, massive head lowered, nostrils flaring, as if he could sense the tension in the air. "I'm not looking for trouble," Eli said, his voice steady. "The horse stays. He ain't hurting anyone." Reeves scratched the corner of his jaw. "That's not what the town thinks. Galloway's been spreading talk. Claims that beast near trampled one of his men at the quarry last spring. Says it's the same horse." Eli turned slightly, resting a hand on Titan's neck. "Talk's cheap. You seen it yourself. He's calm." The sheriff studied the pair a moment longer. Then he sighed, the fight going out of him. "Just keep him clear of Main Street, Barnes. If anything happens, folks'll blame you, not the horse." He tugged his reins, and the two men rode off, the sound of their hooves fading into the wind. Eli watched until they disappeared behind the ridge, then turned to Titan. "You've made yourself a fine reputation, friend," he muttered. "Seems we're both ghosts they'd rather forget." He spent the rest of the morning repairing the fence, each hammer strike echoing through the still air. Titan followed his movements, eyes dark and intelligent. When Eli stopped for water, the horse nuzzled his shoulder gently, as if to apologize for the trouble he'd caused. By noon, the sun had turned cruel. Eli pulled his hat low and led Titan toward the shade of a mesquite tree near the dry wash. From the town below came faint sounds, voices, the ring of a blacksmith's hammer, a dog barking. He could almost forget the stares, the whispers, almost. But as he walked into town later that week, leading Titan to the general store for supplies, he felt every eye turn toward them. Children froze mid-play. A woman dropped her basket of cornmeal. Even the blacksmith stopped his hammer mid-swing. "There he is," someone muttered. "That's the one who bought the killer horse." Eli ignored them and tied Titan to the hitching post outside the store. The horse shifted uneasily, ears flicking back. "Easy now," Eli whispered. "Let him talk." Inside, the store smelled of flour and kerosene. Sarah McAllister, the storekeeper's daughter, stood behind the counter, arms crossed. She looked up, brown hair escaping from her bun, expression wary. "Mr. Barnes," she said carefully, "Sheriff told me you'd be coming by. Said to keep the doorway clear in case your horse decides to come in with you." Eli managed a faint smile. "He's got better manners than most men in this town." Sarah's eyes softened a little. "Maybe so. Still, folks here spook easy. She filled a paper sack with oats and coffee beans, sliding it across the counter. How's the horse treating you? He's been through worse than most of us, Eli said quietly. He just needs time. Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. Time's the one thing folks around here never give anyone. When Eli stepped back onto the porch, 3 boys stood nearby, throwing pebbles at Titan's hooves. The horse snorted, jerking against the rope. Hey! Eli barked. Cut that out! The boys scattered, but not before one shouted over his shoulder, You'll see! That horse'll kill you like he killed the others! Eli's jaw tightened. He untied Titan and walked him toward the end of the street. People stepped aside, their faces wary, like townsfolk watching a storm cloud roll closer. At the corner saloon, Victor Galloway himself leaned against the porch rail, round-bellied, dressed in linen and smugness. The man's gold watch caught the sun like a weapon. Well, if it isn't the charity case of Dust Creek, he called out. Didn't think you'd still be in one piece. Eli stopped, but didn't answer. Galloway grinned wider. You really think you can fix that animal? You can't fix what's bred to kill. Eli's voice came out low, steady. Some things ain't broken, just mistreated. The saloon doors swung behind Galloway's laughter. Keep telling yourself that, cowboy. You'll learn soon enough. Eli turned away, but his stomach burned. The man's words clawed at him, stirring memories of his ranch burning, the crack of splintering wood, the sound of his wife's voice swallowed by the wind. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. That night, clouds gathered over the plains. A thin moon shone through their edges, turning the ground silver. Eli sat by the fence, sharpening a piece of iron into a hook for Titan's halter. The horse stood nearby, shifting occasionally, tail swatting at flies. You heard him, didn't you? Eli said quietly. The rich always think they know what's worth saving. Titan's ear twitched. I used to think that too, Eli went on. Lost everything to that kind of pride. Maybe you did too. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes howled. Titan's head lifted, nostrils flaring. A second later, Eli heard it, the sound of boots crunching gravel. He rose, hand drifting to the old rifle leaning against the porch. Out of the shadows stumbled a drunk ranch hand, hat askew, bottle in hand. Hey, cowboy, he slurred. Let's see if that monster bites. Before Eli could stop him, the man lurched toward Titan, waving the bottle. The horse reared, hooves slicing the air, the ground trembling beneath them. The man stumbled back, fell hard, the bottle shattering beside him. Get away! Eli shouted, rushing forward. He grabbed Titan's halter, voice calm but firm. Easy, boy, easy. It took several long breaths before the horse settled, sides heaving, eyes rolling white in the dark. The drunk scrambled to his feet and ran, tripping over himself in the dust. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind. Eli leaned his forehead against Titan's neck. They'll never understand you, he whispered. But I do. By morning, half the town knew the story. The monster nearly killed a man, they said. It's only a matter of time. Reeves showed up before noon, hat in hand. I know you didn't mean harm, Barnes, but Galloway's calling for the horse to be put down. Eli's stomach dropped. Put down? For defending itself? The sheriff's eyes were heavy. Sometimes it don't matter what's true, just what folks believe. Titan stood in the yard behind them, massive and still, as if he understood every word. The sunlight caught the scar along his shoulder, turning it into a pale, jagged line of fire. Eli stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. Then I'll change what they believe. That night, while Dust Creek slept under a restless wind, Eli set a lantern in the barn and sat beside Titan's stall. He brushed the horse's coat until it shone like pewter, whispering the same rhythm over and over. words not of command, but of promise. "We'll show them, old friend," he said, "not with fear, with patience." Titan lowered his head until his muzzle rested against Eli's shoulder, the weight solid, grounding. For the first time in a long while, Eli closed his eyes and felt something like peace, fragile, but real. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of laughter from the saloon, distant and mean. But it faded quickly into the night, leaving only the sound of a man breathing beside the creature the world called a monster, and the quiet belief that both could still be redeemed. By morning, the air hung heavy with the promise of rain that never came. Dust Creek shimmered beneath a haze of heat, its streets empty except for a stray dog nosing through a barrel and a pair of men unloading sacks of grain. Eli stepped out of the barn, wiping sweat from his neck, his shirt clinging dark with work. Behind him, Titan stirred in his stall, ears twitching to every creak of the old boards. "You're restless," Eli said, glancing back. "So am I." He'd been up since dawn, trying to fix the water pump that barely gave a trickle now. The drought had deepened, turning the creek to a bed of cracked clay. The horses in town had grown thin, ribs showing, and every mouthful of hay cost double what it had a month ago. For a man like Eli Barnes, whose pockets were as dry as the land, each day felt like walking a psalmton, rope stretched over emptiness. Still, he refused to sell Titan. Sheriff Reeves had stopped by again that morning, this time alone, hat in his hands and concern behind his weathered eyes. "Barnes, you know I don't agree with Galloway on most things," he'd said. "But folks are spooked. If that horse sneezes wrong, they'll call for blood." Eli had only nodded. "I'll handle it." After the sheriff left, Eli saddled Titan for the first time. The leather was worn and cracked. The old ranch brand faded from its fenders, but it still smelled of oil and memory. Titan eyed the saddle warily, muscles tightening beneath his skin. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Eli murmured, running a hand down the horse's neck. "You've carried worse than me, I reckon." Slowly, he set the saddle on Titan's back. The horse stood tense but still. When Eli tightened the cinch, Titan's skin quivered, his breath quickened, but he didn't move. "Good boy," Eli said softly. "We'll just take a walk." They stepped out into the open, the morning sun catching on Titan's steel-gray coat. Eli led him around the corral, talking the whole time in that calm, low tone that horses understood better than most people. Titan's hooves thudded steady in the dirt, his massive body gliding with a power that seemed barely contained. Watching from the fence was Clara Mitchell, the town's young veterinarian. She'd heard about the crazy horse and came partly out of curiosity, partly because she couldn't stand to see another animal blamed for man's cruelty. "He's magnificent," she said, as Eli brought Titan to a stop, "but I can see why they were afraid. He's bigger than anything I've ever seen." "Big doesn't mean bad," Eli replied. Clara nodded, eyes narrowing as she studied the horse's shoulder. "He's favoring that leg a little." Eli frowned. "You see something I don't?" She stepped closer, cautious but confident, her boots stirring the dust. Titan shifted, nostrils flaring, but Eli's hand on his neck steadied him. Clara knelt beside the horse and brushed the hair away from a dark ridge of old scar tissue. "There," she said. "That's no wild injury. Looks like a burn. Metal, maybe. Someone used him for hauling near open flame." Eli's jaw tightened. "Galloway's rigs. He's got draft horses pulling those oil barrels out past the quarry. Wouldn't surprise me if Titan was one of them." Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "You should know burns like that leave more than scars. They leave memory. Pain like that stays in the blood." Her words settled in Eli's chest like a stone. He looked into Titan's dark eyes, seeing not danger now, but something closer to sorrow. Then we start over, he said quietly. Clean slate for both of us. That night, a storm crawled across the sky, lightning flickering on the horizon but never breaking the drought. The wind howled through the gaps in the barn roof, rattling every loose board. Eli lay on his cot, listening to the thunder roll away like distant gunfire. At some point, the wind died, and the silence woke him. He rose, heart thudding. The barn door creaked open on its hinges. "Titan?" he called. No answer. Eli grabbed his lantern and stepped into the yard. The night air smelled of dust and ozone. Titan's pen stood open, the rope gate dangling loose. Tracks led down the slope toward Galloway's land, where the glow of the oil lamps burned faintly against the dark. "Damn it," Eli whispered. He threw on his coat, slung the saddle over his shoulder, and followed the prints. The ground trembled faintly as he neared the edge of the quarry. He could hear voices, shouting, rough and mean. He crouched behind a stack of oil drums and saw them. 3 of Galloway's men with whips and lanterns, circling Titan like wolves. The horse's eyes rolled white, the light of the lamps flickering across his sweat-slick coat. Chains hung from his halter, and one man was laughing as he swung the whip again. "Look at the size of him. Worthless brute should have stayed dead." The crack of leather split the night. Titan reared, hooves lashing, the chain snapping against the rocks. The men stumbled back, one falling hard. Eli surged forward without thinking. "Enough!" he roared. The men spun around. "Barnes, you got no business here!" "He's mine," one of them laughed. "Was. Galloway said we could reclaim damaged property. You want him, you'll have to pay." Eli stepped between them and the horse, lantern light throwing his shadow tall against the cliff. "You lay that whip down, or I'll make you eat it." For a tense second, no one moved. Then Titan lunged, not at the men, but toward Eli, breaking free of the last length of chain. The men scattered, swearing as they ran into the dark. Titan stopped short of Eli, chest heaving, eyes wild with fear. "Easy," Eli said, lowering his voice. "It's over. You're safe." But the horse didn't calm. His massive body trembled, the whites of his eyes flashing as if every memory of pain had come flooding back. Eli reached for the halter, and that's when Titan jerked violently, knocking the lantern from his hand. Flames spilled across the dry ground. Eli stomped at it, but the fire caught on spilled oil, flaring high. Titan screamed, a terrible sound that cut through the wind and reared again. His hoof struck Eli's shoulder, throwing him backward into the dirt. By the time he looked up, Titan was gone, vanishing into the black hills beyond the quarry. The fire smoldered out in patches, leaving the air thick with the smell of smoke and oil. Eli sat there, clutching his shoulder, the ache deep and sharp, watching the last light fade. When dawn came, Clara found him slumped against the fence outside his barn, arm bound in a rough sling. "You could have been killed," she said. Eli didn't answer. He just stared at the empty pen. "He ran because he remembered," he murmured. "Didn't trust that I was any different from the rest." Clara knelt beside him, voice soft. "He'll come back. Horses know where they're cared for." Eli shook his head. "He's not like other horses. He's smarter. He knows too much about what men can do." The morning sun rose pale and cold over Dust Creek, glinting off the broken chain still hanging from the fence. Eli picked it up, turning it slowly in his hand. "Maybe some things," he said quietly, "aren't meant to be tamed. Maybe they're just meant to be understood." The wind carried the smell of smoke from the quarry, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a single distant whinny echoed through the valley, a sound full of sorrow and promise both. Eli stood, squinting toward the horizon. "Come back when you're ready, old boy," he said. "I'll be waiting." The words hung in the morning air long after the echo of Titan's cry faded into the hills. Days passed without a sign. Dust Creek went on with its routines, wagons creaking down Main Street, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, and the endless whisper of wind sliding through the canyons. But at the edge of town, Eli's ranch stood silent. He fixed fences that didn't need fixing, oiled the saddle he might never use, and kept a bucket of water by the empty pen, just in case. On the fourth night, under a sky thick with stars, he heard it. A low snort carried by the wind, the steady thud of hooves approaching. Eli rose from the porch slowly, his heart quickening. Out of the darkness, Titan emerged, head bowed, coat streaked with mud and sweat. The horse stopped a few paces away, chest heaving, as if unsure he was welcome. Eli didn't move. He let the silence bridge the distance. "Took you long enough," he murmured, voice breaking. "You hungry?" Titan's ears twitched, and when Eli stepped forward with a handful of hay, the horse lowered his head. There was a moment, fragile, suspended, before Titan took the food from his hand. It was forgiveness, offered and accepted without words. By dawn, the two stood side by side once more, and the town's laughter had already found its way back to Eli's door. "You see that?" one man said at the saloon. "The fool's still trying to gentle the killer." "They'll bury him next to his horse before summer's done," another added. But the whispers didn't reach Eli the way they used to. He was done hearing other people's fear. What mattered now was trust, and the slow, steady rhythm of it. Each morning, Eli worked Titan with patience, never pushing harder than the horse could bear. He spoke constantly, not orders, just conversation. He brushed the big gray's coat until it gleamed, cleaned his hooves, and rebuilt the corral into a wide training pen. Clara visited often, leaning on the fence rail, her sun hat shading kind eyes. "He listens to you," she said one morning. "Not just hears you, listens." Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe because I'm finally learning to listen back." By the second week, Titan allowed the saddle again. Eli took it slow, one strap, one word at a time. The first day, Titan flinched but didn't bolt. The second, he stood still when Eli tightened the girth. By the third, he took a tentative step forward with the saddle on his back, and Eli felt something warm crack open in his chest. Word spread fast. When he brought Titan to the open field behind the general store, a crowd gathered, half curious, half waiting for a show. Sarah McAllister stood beside Clara, her apron dusted with flour from the bakery. "If he pulls this off," she whispered, "the town might just start believing in miracles again." Eli checked the cinch, ran his hand along Titan's neck, and spoke softly enough that only the horse could hear. "We'll do this together. No ropes, no fear. Just you and me, partner." He slipped his foot into the stirrup, the crowd's chatter dimming to a hush. Titan shifted, muscles rippling beneath the saddle leather. For a heartbeat, Eli thought the horse might bolt again. Then Titan stilled, exhaling a slow, deep breath that stirred the dust around them. Eli swung up, settling carefully into the saddle. The world seemed to hold its breath. Titan stood solid, ears flicking back toward Eli's voice. "That's it," Eli said, barely more than a whisper. "Good boy." He pressed his knees gently, asking for movement. Titan stepped forward, heavy hooves sinking into the sand. One step, another. The crowd gasped as if the ground itself had moved. Eli guided him in a wide circle, every motion patient, deliberate. Titan's stride was smooth, almost regal, his head lowering as if acknowledging the rhythm they shared. Dust spiraled up around them, glowing gold in the sunlight. Then, from the saloon porch, came a sharp crack. A gunshot fired into the air. The sound split the peace like lightning. Titan reared with a scream, front hooves slashing against the sky. Eli held the reins tight, trying to calm him. "Easy," Easy, boy. But the old terror had returned. The memory of whips, of fire, of pain. It all flashed through Titan's eyes. He spun hard, the saddle slipping. Eli lost his balance and fell, hitting the dirt with a sickening thud. The crowd scattered as the horse bolted through the field, crashing through a fence before disappearing into the hills once more. Silence followed, thick and awful. Clara ran to Eli's side. "Don't move," she said, kneeling beside him. Blood streaked his cheek, dust sticking to the sweat on his skin. "I'm fine," he groaned, pushing up on one elbow. "Where's Titan?" "Gone," Sarah said softly, clutching her apron. "He headed north." Eli tried to stand, pain flaring in his ribs. "He's not gone," he muttered. "He's scared." "Scared?" one man scoffed. "That beast's crazy. You'll be lucky if he don't come back to finish the job." Clara turned on the speaker with fire in her eyes. "He's not the one who fired that gun?" she snapped. "Fear makes fools of men, not horses." The crowd dispersed slowly, leaving Eli with the wrecked fence and the echo of hoofbeats fading into the canyons. He stood there long after they were gone, his body aching, but his heart heavier still. That night, he sat on the porch again, arm wrapped in a sling Clara had tied for him. The moon hung pale over the ridges. From the darkness beyond the wash came the faint rustle of movement, cautious, rhythmic. Eli's breath caught. He leaned forward. Out of the shadows, Titan appeared, head low, flanks streaked with dust and sweat. The great horse took a hesitant step toward him, nostrils flaring. Eli didn't move. "You came back," he whispered. "You always do." Titan stopped at the edge of the fence, lowering his head as if in apology. His breath shimmered in the moonlight, a slow, living cloud between them. Eli reached out his good hand, palm up. "We'll try again. Not today, not tomorrow. But we will." The horse stood still for a long time, then took one step closer, the faint touch of his muzzle brushing Eli's fingers. It was enough. And for the first time since the fire that destroyed his past, Eli felt something rebuild itself inside him. Not the old life, but a new one, fragile and fierce, born from trust that refused to die. For weeks after the accident, the two moved together as if made from the same quiet resolve. Dawn after dawn, Eli would step from the porch with his coffee steaming in the cool air, and Titan would already be waiting by the fence, head turned toward the sound of the door. The town still whispered, but from a distance now. Even Sheriff Reeves stopped coming by, choosing to let time settle what tempers could not. Dust Creek drifted into the dry stretch of summer. Days baked the earth until it cracked. At night, the wind carried the smell of distant rain that never fell. Eli spent his evenings mending tack or brushing Titan's coat until it glowed silver under the lantern light. Sometimes Clara would stop by after tending sick livestock up the valley. She'd sit on the fence rail, her voice soft against the crickets. "You've got him believing again," she told Eli one night. "That's rarer than most people realize." Eli smiled faintly. "Took me long enough to learn what believing costs." They worked toward the ride again, slow as the turning of seasons. Titan now wore the saddle without a fear. He responded to Eli's voice like a song he'd known forever. When Eli led him to the open field again, no crowd gathered this time, only Clara and the wind. "Let's do it right this time," Eli murmured. He slid into the saddle, movements measured and calm. Titan shifted once, then stood steady beneath him. Eli let out a long breath, feeling the rhythm of the horse's breathing under his boots. "Walk on," he said softly. The horse obeyed. They moved as one man, one beast, tracing slow circles in the sunlit field. Clara clapped once, laughing. "You did it, Eli!" But even as the joy swelled, a shadow crossed his mind. He remembered the laughter of the crowd, the sound of the gun, the look of fear in Titan's eyes. The memory came sharp as broken glass, and he knew trust was never something earned once. It had to be earned every day. That afternoon, as they rested under the mesquite tree, Clara knelt beside Titan's shoulder to check the old burn scars. "He's healing well," she said. "But there's something here." She touched a raised ridge beneath the skin. Eli frowned. "What is it?" "Metal," she said quietly. "Looks like a piece of shackle, maybe from the old quarry rigs. It's deep, near the bone." Eli felt his stomach twist. "Can you get it out?" Clara shook her head. "Not without proper tools and help. But leaving it, well, it might cause him pain when he moves." Titan shifted, sensing the worry. Eli laid a hand on his neck. "We'll figure it out, boy." The days that followed were tense. Titan's gait grew uneven, a slight limp in his front leg. Eli stayed up nights in the barn, pressing cool cloths against the swelling, whispering words meant as comfort. The horse would lean his head against Eli's shoulder, breathing deep, as if trying to absorb his calm. But healing can turn without warning. One evening, the sky broke open with thunder. A storm rolled across the flats, black and wild, throwing lightning against the ridges. Eli tried to calm Titan as the wind howled through the barn, but the horse was trembling, muscles rippling with memory. The smell of ozone, the crack of thunder. It was too close to the scent of burning oil and fire long ago. "Easy, boy," Eli said, his hand firm on the reins. "It's just weather. It'll pass." A flash split the sky, lighting the barn in white. Titan jerked violently, slamming into the stall boards. The sound was thunder within thunder. Eli stumbled, grabbing the halter. "Titan, look at me!" But the horse's terror had returned in full. His hooves struck the floor, sparks flying from the iron shoes. Eli barely managed to unlatch the stall before Titan reared, smashing through the gate, his massive frame filling the doorway in a blur of motion. "Titan, wait!" Eli lunged, caught the reins, and was pulled clean off his feet. The world spun. He hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his ribs. Titan tore free and bolted into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by lightning and rain. Eli lay there, gasping for air, the rain drumming against his face. He tried to rise, but his leg buckled under him. When the pain ebbed enough to move, he crawled back toward the barn, dragging himself inside. Clara found him hours later, soaked and shivering. "My God, Eli!" she cried, rushing to his side. "What happened?" "He ran," Eli rasped. "Storm scared him bad. Same as before." She checked his ribs, grimacing. "You're lucky nothing's broken." "I don't feel lucky." She wrapped him in a blanket, her hands trembling. "He'll come back. He always does." Eli stared into the rain beyond the barn door. Maybe not this time. The next morning, Dust Creek woke to rumors. Some claimed they'd seen the giant horse galloping through the canyon. Others swore he'd been struck by lightning. Galloway's men took the story further, saying Titan had wrecked half his fencing and spooked a herd of cattle. "Monster's gone wild again," they said. "Best thing would be to shoot him before he turns on the town." When Sheriff Reeves brought Eli the news, the older man's face was lined with regret. "They're forming a search party," he said. "They mean to put him down, Eli." Eli pushed himself up from the cot, his ribs wrapped tight. "No, you tell them to stand down." Reeves hesitated. "I can't stop him, son. But maybe you can." That night, under a bruised sky still flickering with the last of the storm, Eli saddled a different horse and rode north toward the canyons. Each hoofbeat sent a jolt of pain through his ribs, but he didn't care. The wind cut cold against his face, carrying the faint scent of wet sage and fear. He found Titan near dawn, standing on a ridge above the wash, his coat dark with rain and mud. The horse looked enormous in the gray light, like something carved from the mountain itself. Eli dismounted, breathing hard. "You've caused quite a stir," he said softly. Titan's ears twitched. He took a step back, uncertain. "I know," Eli whispered, voice trembling. "You're scared. So am I." He approached slowly, one step at a time, until he was close enough to touch the damp skin of Titan's shoulder. "We've both run from things that hurt too much to face," he said. "But running never made the pain smaller, did it?" The horse's sides rose and fell. Eli laid his hand flat against his neck. "It's all right now. You're home." Lightning flashed far off, but this time Titan didn't bolt. He lowered his head until it pressed gently against Eli's chest, the sound of his breathing heavy and real. By the time they returned to the barn, dawn had broken clean and bright over Dust Creek. The search party never left town. They woke to see a man and his horse walking out of the mist, side by side like survivors from another world. Clara watched from the fence, tears catching the morning light. She whispered to herself, "He came back." Eli, limping and sore, looked up at her and smiled faintly. "Told you," he said. "He always does." Behind them, the first warmth of sunrise spilled across the fields, touching the battered barn and the scarred horse alike, two souls who had fallen and risen together. For a few precious weeks, Dust Creek knew a strange kind of peace. The gossip faded, replaced by cautious respect. Folks still gave Titan a wide berth, but when Eli rode him into town for supplies, no one dared mock anymore. The sight of that towering gray horse moving calm as riverstone beside a man who'd once been a ghost, it quieted even the cruelest tongues. Sheriff Reeves tipped his hat when he passed. Clara brought medicine and smiled more easily. And Sarah McAllister, who once watched from the bakery window, began leaving oats wrapped in burlap at the edge of Eli's property. The drought, though, never loosened its grip. The creek that gave the town its name had dwindled to a shallow trickle, more mud than water. The cattle grew lean. Wells ran dry. Each evening, Eli would look west toward the ridge, where clouds built high and heavy, only to blow apart before spilling a drop. "Storm's teasing us again," he muttered one afternoon, leaning against the fence as Titan grazed nearby. Clara rode up, hat pulled low against the sun. "They're saying Victor Galloway's dam is holding back the last of the water," she said grimly. "He's storing it for his oil fields, while the rest of the town goes thirsty." Eli frowned. That dam wasn't built to hoard water. It was meant to stop flash floods. Clara looked toward the hills, where the faint glint of metal tanks shimmered. "Maybe it's doing both now. He's got guards posted. No one goes near it." Eli ran a tone, hand over Titan's neck, feeling the steady rhythm of muscle beneath his palm. "A man who owns the water owns everything, and Galloway's never known when to stop owning." That night, the wind shifted. Warm air from the south met cold clouds rolling down from the mountains. By midnight, lightning flickered along the horizon, the kind that doesn't blink, just crawls like veins of fire across the sky. Eli woke to the low rumble of thunder and the smell of rain. Titan stood restless in his stall, hooves stamping. "Easy," Eli murmured, running a hand along his side. "We've waited too long for rain to be scared of it now." But when the first drops hit the tin roof, it wasn't gentle. It was a wall of water, slamming down with the weight of years of drought. Within minutes, the yard turned to a sea of mud. The wind howled, tearing shingles loose. Titan snorted, backing against the boards. Lightning split the sky, lighting the ridge where Galloway's dam stood. For a heartbeat, Eli thought he saw movement. Lanterns, men running along the top of the structure. Then came a sound that made the earth itself flinch, the deep, cracking roar of something giving way. Eli's stomach went cold. "No, he whispered. He threw open the stall door and grabbed Titan's halter. "Come on, boy!" They galloped out into the storm, wind and water cutting across their faces. Downhill, the town lights flickered as the first wave of floodwater thundered through the canyon. The dam had burst. When they reached the ridge, Eli could see the damage. Half the earthen wall was gone, the river pouring through in a churning brown torrent. A cluster of men struggled near the break, Galloway's crew shouting over the wind. One man turned as Eli rode up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Barnes, get back! The whole damn ridge is coming down!" Eli ignored him. "Where's Galloway?" A flash of lightning answered for him. Victor Galloway clinging to a broken rail halfway down the slope, water surging around his legs. His horse was gone, swept into the current. Eli looked at Titan. "We can't leave him." The horse's ears pinned back against the rein, but he didn't move away. He stepped forward, muscles bunching, as if he already knew the choice was made. They plunged into the water. The cold hit like a hammer, but Titan drove forward, his strength cutting through the current. Galloway's voice was a faint cry against the storm. "Help me, for God's sake, Barnes!" "Grab the rope!" Eli shouted, tossing the end of a lariat. Galloway missed once, twice, then caught it on the third try. Titan heaved, dragging both men toward the bank. Every pull strained against the water's rage, each step a battle between muscle and mud. When they finally reached solid ground, Galloway collapsed, coughing up river water. Eli slid from the saddle, chest heaving. "You all right?" he asked. Galloway looked up, eyes burning with anger even through the fear. "You think saving me makes us even?" Eli shook his head. "I think it makes you alive. That's more than some men deserve." The storm didn't care for their quarrel. A fresh boom of thunder rolled across the valley, and Titan flinched, jerking his head toward the town below. The floodwater had reached the first houses, sweeping wagons aside like toys. "My God!" Clara's voice came from behind. She'd followed on her mare, soaked to the bone. "Eli, the Henderson kids, they live right on the creek bank." Eli's pulse jumped. "Then we're not done yet." He swung back onto Titan, water dripping from his hat brim. "You stay here," he shouted to Galloway, but the man only glared. Eli and Clara tore down the slope, the rain hitting like nails. The town was chaos, people shouting, dogs barking, lanterns swinging in the dark. The Henderson house stood half submerged, the lower floor swallowed by the surge. A faint cry carried through the storm. "They're upstairs!" Clara yelled. Eli spurred Titan forward. The horse lunged into the water without hesitation, swimming through the current like a living engine. Debris slammed against his flanks. Branches, barrels, a broken gate. But he kept going, ears flat, nostrils flaring. "Hold steady," Eli called, voice barely audible. They reached the porch, half collapsed under the weight of the flood. A boy clung to the window frame, sobbing, his sister behind him. "Jump!" Eli shouted. The boy hesitated, eyes wide with terror. Then, with Clara's cry urging him on, he leapt, straight into Eli's arms. Eli set him behind the saddle, then reached again. "Your turn," he called to the girl. She hesitated only a second longer before jumping into Clara's grip. The moment she did, part of the roof tore free with a shriek. "Go!" Clara yelled. Eli turned Titan toward the main street. "Hang on, boy!" The horse powered through the water, each stride pushing against the flood's fury. By the time they reached higher ground, both riders and children were shaking, breathless, but alive. The storm began to break then, the thunder moving east, the rain softening to a steady whisper. The water slowed, spreading into the fields instead of devouring them. Clara slid off her horse, lifting the girl into her arms. The child clung to her, crying softly. "You're all right," Clara whispered. "You're safe now." Eli stroked Titan's neck, his own voice hoarse. "You did it, old boy. You saved them." The horse stood still, sides heaving, eyes bright even in exhaustion. For a long moment, man and animal simply breathed together, steam rising from their bodies into the cool dawn air. When the townsfolk emerged from the ruins of their homes, they saw what no one could mock anymore. The gray giant standing guard beside the river, Eli Barnes beside him, two survivors against the storm. By sunrise, the sky cleared, washing the land in gold. The dam lay in ruins, Galloway's empire with it. But Dust Creek still stood, because a man too poor to matter and a horse too wild to trust had refused to turn away. Smoke rose from broken chimneys. The river had carved new paths through the town, leaving behind a mosaic of mud, shattered fences, and overturned wagons. People wandered the streets barefoot and dazed, their faces streaked with grime but lit by something like gratitude. For the first time in months, they weren't talking about Galloway or the drought. They were talking about Titan. "Biggest horse I've ever seen," a rancher said. "Swam right through the flood like he owned the river." "Eli Barnes was with him," another replied. "Didn't think the man had much left in him. Guess I was wrong." Eli didn't hear the talk. He and Clara spent the morning helping move debris, guiding what remained of the cattle to higher ground. Titan hauled broken wagons from the mud, the muscles in his shoulders working like the gears of a great machine. Every time he strained against the weight of a fallen beam or dragged a waterlogged cart upright, the people nearby fell silent. It was as if they were watching something holy. By afternoon, the sun beat down on the wreckage, drying the mud to a crust. Sheriff Reeves rode through town, stopping near Eli's property, where Titan drank from a trough. Reeves dismounted, tipping his hat. "Town council wants to thank you, Eli. You and that horse saved lives." Eli didn't look up from tightening the girth on the saddle. "We just did what had to be done." Reeves gave a slow grin. Funny how the ones who say that are always the ones who did more than anyone else. He grew serious, lowering his voice. "Galloway's hurt but alive. Says he wants a word with you." Eli's jaw set. "A word won't change what he's done." "Maybe not," Reeves said. "But he's got influence still. Might be better to hear him out." Eli didn't answer. He ran a hand along Titan's neck, feeling the rough texture of drying mud beneath his fingers. The horse flicked an ear, but stayed still. "All right," Eli said at last. "Let's hear what the man has to say." They found Galloway near the remnants of his mansion on the ridge. The flood had spared part of the house, though its grand porch leaned at a dangerous angle. Galloway sat wrapped in a blanket, his left arm bandaged, his eyes pale and furious. "Well," he said as Eli approached, "the hero of Dust Creek, come to gloat?" "I came because the sheriff said you wanted to talk," Eli replied evenly. Galloway's lips curled. "You think this makes you some kind of saint? You ruined my dam, cost me a fortune, and they cheer for you like a savior." "The dam ruined itself," Eli said quietly. "You built it to hoard water, not hold it. Nature just called your bluff." The older man leaned forward, voice trembling with bitterness. "That horse should have died when it was chained to my rigs. It was a wild mistake then, and it's a mistake now. You think the town will remember you kindly when it's hungry again? They'll turn on you the same way they turned on me." Eli's gaze stayed steady. "Maybe, but I'll still have my conscience, and a horse that saved your life when he didn't have to." Galloway stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You think beasts understand mercy?" Eli turned to leave. "Better than most men I know." He and Reeves rode back down the hill in silence. By the time they reached town, word had spread that Galloway was packing to leave Dust Creek for good. That night, a crowd gathered outside the saloon. A handful of lanterns lit the muddy street, their glow warm against the cool air. Someone brought a fiddle, another a bottle of whiskey, and before long, laughter replaced the quiet grief that had blanketed the town. Clara stood beside Eli near the hitching post. "You know they're talking about naming the bridge after him," she said, nodding toward Titan. Eli chuckled. "He'll never cross it. Too proud for that." "Maybe," she said softly. "But pride can be beautiful when it's earned." A small boy approached them, clutching a piece of scrap wood. "Mr. Barnes?" Eli crouched down. "What's that you've got there, son?" "It's for your horse," the boy said. On the wood, in shaky letters, he'd carved Titan the Brave. "Mama said heroes should have their names written down." Eli smiled, his throat tightening. "She's right about that." He handed the boy a coin. "Buy yourself a piece of candy. You've done him proud." The boy ran off, and Clara watched as Eli nailed the wooden plaque to the front of Titan's stall. "That's going to make him impossible to live with," she teased. "He earned it," Eli replied. "We both did." The night deepened. Music drifted through the air, mingled with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Titan stood nearby, his coat shining in the lamplight, eyes half closed as if he understood the peace that had settled over the town. But peace in Dust Creek never lasted long. Sometime past midnight, the distant cry of a coyote broke through the laughter. Then another sound, a groan deep in the earth, faint but unmistakable. Eli froze, every instinct alert. He looked toward the valley and saw it, a dark shape moving under the moonlight where the dam had stood. The ground trembled again. He stepped into the street. "Reeves," he called. "You hear that?" The sheriff turned from the Sheraton saloon steps, eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "The reservoir," Eli said. "There's still water up there, trapped under the rockslide." Before Reeves could reply, a second rumble rolled through the night, louder this time. A chorus of dogs started barking, and people spilled out of their homes, looking around in confusion. Then the unthinkable happened. From the far edge of town came the sound of shattering wood. A wall of water, smaller than the first flood, but fierce enough to kill, burst through the canyon, carrying debris and mud. The remnants of the dam were collapsing. "Get to higher ground," Reeves shouted. Eli didn't hesitate. He swung onto Titan's back and spurred him toward the lower end of town where the river cut deepest. The water was coming fast, sweeping through fences and sheds. Somewhere in the chaos, a woman screamed. He found her on the porch of the boarding house, trapped under a fallen beam, the water already lapping at her waist. Eli dismounted, wading through the current. "Hold on," he called. Titan plunged in beside him, the flood pushing against his chest. Eli braced his shoulder under the beam and lifted with all his strength. It didn't budge, until Titan pressed his massive head against the wood and heaved. The beam rolled free, and Eli pulled the woman clear. "Get to the hill," he shouted, pushing her towards safety. The water rose higher. Eli grabbed Titan's mane and climbed back into the saddle. "One more run, partner." They turned back toward the center of town, where a group of people clung to the roof of the church. The steeple bell clanged wildly in the current. Titan fought the water, each stride a battle against the flood's pull. Eli's vision blurred with rain and exhaustion. "Come on, boy," he yelled. With a final surge, Titan reached the church steps. Eli helped the townsfolk climb down one by one, his body shaking with fatigue. Clara's voice cut through the roar of the river. "Eli, that's enough!" But it wasn't enough. Not while others still needed help. He turned Titan for one last trip. The horse obeyed without question, even as the water churned higher around them. A wave hit, lifting them off balance. For a terrible moment, Eli felt the world spin. Then everything went white. When he woke, he was on the bank, coughing up mud and water. Clara knelt beside him, crying. "You're alive," she breathed. Eli tried to speak, but could only point toward the river. Titan! The horse was gone. All that remained was the faint echo of a whinny fading into the rain, a sound that carried through the valley like the last note of a hymn. For a long time, Eli lay where Clara had dragged him, staring at the gray sky through half-lidded eyes. The rain had softened into a mist, washing mud from his face and pooling in the hollows of the ground. His ribs ached with every breath. The taste of river water and blood sat heavy on his tongue. Somewhere in the distance, church bells clanged weakly, half broken, their sound a ghost of what it had been. Titan was gone. The realization struck harder than the flood ever had. Eli pushed himself upright, ignoring Clara's protest. "He's out there," he rasped. "Eli, stop. You can barely stand." "I can't just leave him." She caught his arm, her face pale beneath the grime. "You've done enough. The town's still standing because of you both. If he's alive, he'll come back, he always does." Eli looked toward the river, now calm and deceptively peaceful. "And if he doesn't?" Clara said nothing. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet earth and splintered wood. Around them, Dust Creek began to stir again, neighbors calling to each other, checking for the missing, counting the living. Children clung to parents, dazed but alive. The saloon's sign hung by a single chain, creaking in the breeze. By afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the ruined town in light that felt too bright for morning. Eli helped where he could, his body moving on sheer will. He lifted beams, cleared debris, spoke quiet words to the frightened. But every time he glanced toward the river, his heart sank a little more. That evening, Sheriff Reeves rode in from the east with 2 men and grim faces. "We found a trail," he said. "Looks like a horse made it out past the canyon bend, but there's a lot of wreckage downriver. Hard to say." Eli's chest tightened. "Show me." Clara stepped forward. "Eli, don't." "I have to." The sheriff nodded, understanding. "We'll leave at dawn." When the sun rose, the 3 men and Eli followed the flood's path for miles. The land was scarred, a patchwork of uprooted trees, twisted fencing, and drowned cattle. Birds circled overhead, crying out in the silence. Eli's boots squelched in the mud, each step heavier than the last. They found pieces of Titan's gear first, the shredded remains of his halter tangled in driftwood, a fragment of the saddle caught in reeds. Eli picked it up, fingers trembling. The leather was cracked, but the initials he'd carved, EB, were still visible. Reeves dismounted. "Could be he broke free before the current took him under." Eli nodded without speaking. His throat was too tight for words. The trail continued along the water's edge, faint but steady, large hoofprints deep in the wet earth. The further they went, the more Eli's heart fought to believe. "See there?" one of the deputies said, pointing. "Tracks head up toward the ridge." Eli followed them into a narrow pass. Wildflowers had already begun to push through the silt, small, stubborn bursts of color against the gray. When he reached the crest, the prints ended abruptly. Ahead, a cliff dropped into the valley below, the river curling like a ribbon of silver. He sank to his knees, staring out across the emptiness. Titan had either fallen or found another way, one Eli couldn't see. The sheriff rested a hand on his shoulder. "You did what you could, son." Eli didn't answer. The wind tore at his coat, carrying the low sound of the river far below. By the time he returned to town, Dust Creek had begun rebuilding. Men hammered planks over broken windows. Women hung blankets in the sun. Children laughed again, too young to understand how close they'd come to losing everything. Eli stood apart from it all, his hands raw, his spirit hollow. That night, Clara found him sitting beside Titan's empty stall. The lantern burned low, shadows dancing across the walls. The wooden plaque still hung there, Titan the Brave, its edges warped by water, but the letters clear. "He saved more than lives, you know," she said softly. "He gave them something to believe in again." Eli's gaze stayed fixed on the stall door. "He gave me more than that. He gave me back myself." Clara sat beside him. "Then don't dishonor that by giving up now." "I ain't given up," Eli said quietly. "I'm waiting." The next morning he walked the fields at dawn, the world still damp with dew. The air smelled of sage and new beginnings. He followed the ridge again, hoping against hope. Nothing. By the third day, word spread through Dust Creek that the storm's hero was gone for good. A few townsfolk built a marker near the river. Nothing fancy, just a wooden cross carved with a single word: Titan. When Eli saw it, he said nothing. He only nodded and placed his hat over his heart. Nights grew quiet again. The moon rose clean and white over the valley, the sound of frogs returning to the creek. But for Eli, the silence was heavier than any storm. He dreamed of hoofbeats in the distance, of gray shapes moving through fog, of soft knickers that woke him with tears he didn't understand. Then, one dawn nearly 2 weeks later, the dream became real. He was out near the far fence, mending a line of posts, when something caught his eye, a movement in the fog rolling off the hills. At first, he thought it was just mist shifting. Then came a sound he'd know anywhere, the deep, steady beat of hooves. Eli froze, breath caught in his chest. The shape grew clearer with each step: broad shoulders, proud neck, coat streaked with mud and sunlight. Titan. The horse moved slowly, limping but alive. His mane clung to his neck, his sides scarred from the river's wrath. When he reached Eli, he stopped, lowering his head until it nearly touched the man's chest. Eli's voice broke on the first word: "You old fool." Titan's breath came warm and steady, carrying the faint smell of wild sage. His body trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Eli pressed his forehead to the horses. "You came back." Behind them, the town bell rang, not in warning, but in celebration. Clara and Reeves arrived moments later, their horses skidding to a halt. Clara gasped, covering her mouth. "By heaven, he's alive!" Eli smiled through tears. "Told you he'd come back." As the morning sun broke through the fog, Titan stood tall again, the light turning his battered coat to silver. Around them, Dust Creek stirred to life, people gathering on porches, children pointing and shouting, hope blooming like wildflowers after rain. For the first time since the storm, Eli felt peace. He rested a hand on Titan's neck. "You found your way home," he whispered. "Guess we both did." And as the horse snorted softly, ears flicking toward the sound of laughter rising from the town below, the silence that had haunted Dust Creek finally lifted, replaced by something stronger, something lasting. Not just survival, but faith reborn. For weeks after Titan's return, Dust Creek carried an air of quiet rebirth. The valley bloomed again, grass pushing through the dried earth like forgiveness. The flood had destroyed much, but it had also fed the soil. And with every sunrise, the town began to look less like a ruin and more like a place that had learned how to endure. Eli rebuilt his barn first. He patched the roof himself, plank by plank, while Titan stood nearby, grazing lazily in the tall grass. Clara often stopped by with supplies: nails, oil, coffee, pretending it was charity for the horse but always leaving a little extra for Eli. "You two are becoming legends," she said one afternoon, leaning against the fence. "You know that, don't you?" Eli smirked, brushing sawdust from his hands. Legends don't have splinters, Clara. She laughed, but her eyes softened. Maybe not, but folks need stories like yours. Reminds them that courage still counts for something. Eli didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted toward the distant ridge, the scarred line where Galloway's dam had once stood. Beyond it, the hills rolled toward the horizon. And in that light, something shimmered. A faint, metallic gleam half buried under the new grass. Clara, he said slowly, what do you make of that? She followed his gaze, squinting. Probably debris from the flood. Maybe, Eli murmured. But later that evening, curiosity got the better of him. He saddled Titan and rode out toward the ridge as the sky turned copper and purple. The land still smelled of damp clay. Cracked boards from the dam lay scattered like bones, and there, half buried in silt and weeds, was something that didn't belong. A section of metal piping, thick and dark, connected to a wooden hatch now warped by water. Eli dismounted, brushing mud away until he saw the outline of a trapdoor built into the ground. He glanced around, no one in sight, then tugged the handle. It resisted, creaking open with a sigh. A stairway led down into darkness. Titan snorted uneasily, ears twitching. Easy, boy, Eli said. I just want to look. He lit a lantern from his saddlebag and descended. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of oil and dust. The tunnel beneath the hill stretched farther than he expected. Wooden beams reinforced with iron brackets, and lining the walls were crates, dozens of them, marked with a symbol Eli recognized, Galloway mining cone. He pried one open. Inside were canisters of blasting powder, still sealed and dry. Another crate held metal fittings, maps, and ledgers filled with careful handwriting. As he turned the pages, Eli's eyes narrowed. The entries weren't about irrigation or flood control. They detailed excavation schedules, pressure readings, and mineral yields. Galloway hadn't built the dam to hoard water. He'd built it to mask something else entirely. Eli ran his fingers over one page labeled Project Ember Ridge. The notes described a vein of coal running beneath Dust Creek, a rich deposit that Galloway had planned to access through controlled flooding. He wasn't hoarding water to survive drought. He was flooding the valley to loosen the rock and claim the land. A shadow passed across the light. Titan stamped above, restless. Then a sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel, the faint scrape of a boot against gravel. Eli froze. Who's there? No answer. Just the soft shuffle of movement, closer this time. He snuffed the lantern and pressed himself against the wall. A moment later, a thin beam of light appeared. Another lantern, moving cautiously through the dark. The figure holding it stepped into view, and Eli felt his pulse quicken. Victor Galloway. The man looked different now. Gaunt, hollow-eyed, his fine coat stained with mud. But his voice was the same, cold and precise. I wondered who'd find this place first. Should have known it'd be you, Roshla stepped forward, keeping his voice low. You built the dam to reach the coal. You risked every life in this valley for profit. Galloway smirked. Risk is just the price of ambition. You call that ambition? Eli spat. You nearly drowned your own people. They weren't my people, Galloway snapped. They were in my way. For a moment, the only sound was dripping water and the quiet creak of settling wood. Then Eli noticed the fuse in Galloway's hand. You wouldn't, Eli said. Galloway smiled faintly. You think I'll let you ruin what's left of me? This mine is all I've got. If I can't have it, no one will. Eli lunged forward. The two men crashed against the crates, the lantern spinning out of reach. Sparks scattered across the floor. Titan's distant whinny echoed down the tunnel as the men struggled in the dark. Galloway shoved Eli hard, breaking free just long enough to strike the match. The fuse hissed to life. Victor, don't! But the man was already retreating down another corridor, limping into the black. Eli turned to the fuse, heart hammering. The flame hissed along the line, crawling toward the powder crates. He grabbed it with his bare hand, pain searing up his arm as he tore it free and stomped it out. Smoke filled the tunnel. When the light cleared, Galloway was gone. Eli stumbled toward the exit, lungs burning. Titan was waiting above, stamping anxiously. "Let's go," Eli gasped, pulling himself into the saddle. "Now!" They galloped away from the ridge as the first explosion hit. The ground jumped beneath them, a dull roar rolling through the valley. Dust and fire burst from the hillside, scattering birds into the twilight. When it was over, a thin column of smoke rose into the sky, and the ridge collapsed in on itself. The secret Galloway had buried was gone, buried under its own greed. Eli reined Titan in at the crest of the plain, watching the smoke twist into the clouds. "It's over," he said softly. "For good this time." Clara met him back in town, her face pale when she saw the soot and blood on his sleeve. "What happened?" "Galloway's done," Eli said simply. "Whatever he was hiding up there, it won't hurt anyone again." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "And Titan?" Eli glanced at the horse, who stood tall despite the dirt and ash streaking his coat. "Still the best partner a fool like me could ever ask for." That night, the stars came out over Dust Creek, brighter than Eli had seen in years. The ridge still smoldered, but the air felt cleaner, freer. He leaned against the fence outside his rebuilt barn, Titan beside him, both silhouettes cut against the silver moonlight. "You and me," Eli said quietly, patting his companion's shoulder. "Looks like we've still got work to do." Titan turned his head, the faintest nicker rumbling from deep in his chest, as if to say, "We always do." And beneath the quiet hum of crickets and wind through the grass, Dust Creek breathed again, a town reborn not by luck or gold, but by the stubborn hearts of a man and his horse. Weeks passed, and peace settled across the valley like dust after a long storm. The river ran clear again, the fields turned green, and laughter returned to Main Street. New fences rose, roofs were mended, and for the first time in years, the sound of hammering meant building instead of survival. Eli's ranch thrived quietly on the edge of town. Titan grazed in the pasture each morning, his coat sleek once more, his gait steady despite the scars that ran across his shoulder from the flood. The town still whispered his name with reverence, Titan the Brave. But Eli never liked the title. He'd say, "He's just doing what comes natural, helping those who can't help themselves." But beneath that peace there was a restlessness neither man nor horse could shake. The land felt too still, the kind of quiet that comes not from safety, but from something waiting. It was early autumn when Sheriff Reeves rode up the dirt road to Eli's ranch. His face was set, his eyes shadowed. Eli was mending a fence rail when he saw him coming. "Morning, Sheriff," he said, straightening. "You look like bad news on a good horse." Reeves swung down from his saddle. "You could say that. We've had word. Bandits out near the southern ridge. Raiders from across the border, taking cattle, supplies, even people." Eli frowned. "How far?" 3 days' ride, maybe less. They're heading this way." Clara appeared in the doorway of the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. "Tell me you're not asking him to." "I'm asking for help," Reeves said. "Not orders. You know this country better than any man alive, Barnes. You and that horse of yours could make the difference." Eli looked out over the fields where Titan grazed beneath the golden sky. "You're sure it's them?" Reeves nodded. "We found the mark they leave behind, burned into a fence post near Buck Hollow." Eli sighed. "Then we don't have much time." Clara stepped forward. "Eli, no. You've done enough for this town." He turned to her, his eyes tired but kind. I can't just sit and watch trouble roll in again. Not when I've got a chance to stop it. You'll get yourself killed, she said, voice trembling. He managed a faint smile. Wouldn't be the first time I tried. By sunset, he had his saddle packed. Titan stood calm as Eli checked each strap, each buckle, the routine as familiar as breathing. Reeves waited near the gate, his horse stamping impatiently. Clara stood beside Titan, resting her hand against the great horse's muzzle. "Promise me you'll come back," she whispered. Eli paused, then placed his hand over hers. "I'll do my best, but you take care of Dust Creek if I don't." She looked away, fighting tears. "I'll take care of it either way." The two men rode into the dying light, the sun melting into the horizon behind them. Dust trailed in their wake, glowing like smoke in the amber air. The journey south took 2 days. They passed through canyons carved by time and weather, the air growing dry and sharp. By the third morning, the tracks appeared. Boot prints, hoof marks, and wagon ruts cutting deep into the dirt. Reeves signaled for silence. They followed the trail until the smell of campfire drifted through the mesquite. Below a bluff, 6 riders sat around a dying fire, their laughter coarse and mean. A wagon stood nearby, its cargo covered by a tarp. Eli's stomach tightened when he saw the shape underneath, a person bound and struggling. Reeves looked to him. "You take the left, I'll circle." Eli nodded, patting Titan's neck. "Easy, boy. Just like herding cattle." They moved like shadows, the wind covering their approach. When the outlaws finally noticed them, it was too late. Reeves fired first, a warning shot into the air. "Hands up," he shouted. "You're surrounded." The bandits spun, guns flashing in the firelight. Titan surged forward, muscles bunching as Eli urged him down the slope. Bullets whined past them, kicking dust into the air. Eli fired once, his shot hitting a man's revolver clean out of his hand. Another outlaw reached for the wagon. "Get the girl," he yelled. "Not today," Eli growled. Titan slammed into the man like a thunderbolt, sending him sprawling. The horse's hooves pounded, cutting through chaos like storm drums. The gang scattered, firing wildly. Reeves took cover behind a boulder, returning shots with calm precision. The fight lasted less than a minute. When the dust cleared, 2 outlaws lay wounded, the rest fled into the hills. Reeves bound their hands while Eli cut the ropes from the captive, a young woman, pale and shaking, but alive. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli tipped his hat. "You're safe now, ma'am." But the victory was short-lived. As they prepared to head back, Reeves's horse reared suddenly, a shot cracking from the canyon ridge above. Eli spun, spotting a lone rider in black aiming down at them. "Go!" Reeves shouted. Eli fired, missing by inches. The outlaw's second bullet struck Titan's flank. The sound it made was like a hammer to Eli's heart. Titan stumbled, muscles seizing, but somehow stayed upright. Eli dismounted instantly, hands frantic on the wound. "Easy, boy, easy." Blood darkened the gray coat. Titan's breath came ragged, eyes wide with pain, but still searching for Eli's face. Reeves climbed the ridge and returned minutes later, dragging the shooter behind him. "It's done," the sheriff said grimly. Eli barely heard him. His whole world had shrunk to the trembling weight beneath his hands. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Please, Titan. Don't you quit now." The horse's ears flicked once, and he pressed his muzzle weakly against Eli's shoulder. The same gesture from the very first day. Reeves knelt beside him. "We've got to move. He won't make it here." Eli swallowed hard, his throat thick. "Then he won't die here either." With the sheriff's help, they made a stretcher from the wagon tarp. Titan bore the pain in silence, eyes half closed, trusting Eli's voice the whole way home. It took them 3 days to reach Dust Creek. Every mile was a prayer. When they finally arrived, Clara ran from the barn, her face stricken. "Dear Lord." Eli met her gaze, tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. "He's alive, but I don't know for how long." They worked through the night. Clara fetched water while Reeves stitched the wound under lamplight. Titan barely moved, save for the rise and fall of his chest. Eli never left his side. At dawn, when the first light touched the barn, Titan stirred. Eli leaned close, whispering, "You're safe, partner. You did it." The horse's eyes softened, and for a moment, the morning felt eternal, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. Then Titan exhaled once, deeply, like a sigh of release, and went still. Eli's hands fell to his knees. The barn filled with silence so heavy it felt like the world was holding its breath again. Clara stepped forward, tears running freely now. Reeves removed his hat. No one spoke. Eli rested his head against Titan's neck. "You were the best damn horse that ever lived," he whispered. Outside, the sunrise broke across the hills, gold and endless. The same light that had watched them fight, survive, and rebuild. In that light, Dust Creek stood strong once more, and though the horse who had saved it was gone, his spirit lingered. In every hoofprint hardened into the mud, in the hearts of the people who would never forget him, and in the man who had learned, at last, what it meant to love something more than his own survival. The morning after Titan's passing, the sky over Dust Creek glowed soft and pale, as if the world itself mourned quietly. No one rang the bell. No hammers struck wood. Even the wind seemed to hush when it passed through the valley. Eli didn't speak for a long time. He stayed by the stall until the sun rose high enough to warm the wood of the barn. Clara stood at the doorway, her hands clasped around a mug of coffee gone cold. She wanted to say something, anything, but words felt small beside the weight of the silence between them. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "We'll bury him on the ridge, where the wind never stops." Eli nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on Titan's still form. He'd like that. By noon, the whole town had gathered. Men from the blacksmith's shop, ranch hands, even the children who'd once laughed at the crazy cowboy and his monster horse. They came in work clothes and Sunday hats alike, each holding their hats against their hearts. Together, they led Titan one last time through the street he had saved, past the saloon, the church, the rebuilt general store. The sound of boots and wagon wheels was the only music. Clara walked beside Eli, their shoulders brushing now and then, both silent beneath the weight of goodbye. At the ridge, the land opened wide to the horizon. The sun stretched long shadows across the grass. They dug the grave by hand, the men trading tools without words. Reeves placed a carved wooden marker at its head. Titan, the horse that stood when others fell. When it was done, Eli knelt by the mound of fresh earth and set something on top, a small piece of leather from the halter Titan had worn on the day they first met. His fingers lingered there, tracing the worn edges. "Rest easy, old boy," he murmured. "You've earned it." The wind shifted then, gentle, almost warm, and for a heartbeat, Eli swore he heard a low whinny carried through the grass. Clara heard it too. She turned to him, eyes wet. "You think—" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think he's still keeping watch." That night, the town held a supper in the square. Not of mourning, but of gratitude. Laughter returned in soft ripples, the kind that comes after tears. Reeves spoke of courage. Clara read from her father's old Bible, the verse about good stewardship and faith tested by fire. When they toasted, Eli lifted his glass but said little. The stars above seemed closer than they had ever been. For the first time, he didn't feel alone beneath them. Days turned into weeks. Life in Dust Creek found its rhythm again. The river ran true, the crops came in green, and children played along the banks without fear. Galloway's name was never spoken anymore. The ridge where Titan rested became a place of quiet pilgrimage. Travelers stopped to leave tokens, horseshoes, spurs, even a single apple once. One evening, as autumn turned the hills gold, Clara rode up to Eli's ranch. A stray colt trailed behind her, a big, awkward thing with a white blaze and curious eyes. "Found him near the ridge," she said. "No brand, no owner." Eli looked at the colt for a long moment. The animal snorted, stepped closer, and nudged his hand like he already belonged there. "Reckon he chose his own home," Eli said softly. Clara smiled. "What'll you call him?" Eli glanced toward the ridge where the last light of day burned against the sky. "Promise," he said. "That's his name, because that's what Titan left behind." The colt flicked his tail, tossing his head proudly, and Eli felt something stir in his chest, a warmth he hadn't known since before the flood, before the laughter, before everything. It wasn't replacing what he'd lost. It was honoring it. As twilight deepened, Eli saddled Promise and rode out across the open field. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of rain and the faint hum of cicadas. Somewhere beyond the horizon, thunder rolled, but softly this time, like a reminder instead of a warning. Clara watched from the fence, her hair loose in the breeze, her heart steady for the first time in months. The figure of man and horse moved through the fading light, framed by the vastness of Texas and the whisper of the plains. Eli slowed, turned Promise toward the ridge, and lifted his hat in salute. The colt pawed the ground, restless to run, and Eli laughed, really laughed, for the first time since the world had tried to break him. "Go on, boy," he said. "Let's see what you're made of." They broke into a gallop, the sound of hooves echoing through the valley like music. Dust rose behind them, catching the dying sun, glowing gold. Down below, the people of Dust Creek looked up at the sight. One man, one horse, chasing the horizon again. A town reborn by courage, by kindness, and by the faith that outlasts even death. And as night fell, a breeze swept through the ridge, stirring the grass where Titan lay. The stars shimmered brighter, as though the heavens themselves bowed in gratitude to the creature who had once saved a town and a man's soul. And as night fell, a breeze swept through the ridge, stirring the grass where Titan lay. The stars shimmered brighter, as though the heavens themselves bowed in gratitude to the creature who had once saved a town and a man's soul. If this story reached you tonight, even just a little, drop a simple "one" down below. That's all it takes to let us know you're out there, listening beneath the same wide sky. And if you'd ride with us again, hit subscribe and stay close, because out here on the frontier, every dawn carries another story of courage, kindness, and the wild hearts that refuse to break.